Hi, thanks for joining us in our ongoing conversation about nearshoring and reshoring. This is part two of the discussion where we'll explore solutions, challenges, and opportunities that are presented in this important decision of nearshoring or reshoring. With us today, we have David Pate, who is a Vice President of Operations at TBM Consulting, and Chip Barth, who is Managing Director of Supply Chain for TBM as well. So, in the decision to nearshore or reshore, a couple of things have probably happened up to this point, and we've provided a little bit of feedback on determining your strategy, analyzing if you're the right candidate for reshoring or nearshoring. We've investigated total cost of ownership and impact on service, inventory, and productivity. And we've also identified that it's very important to, identify evaluation tracks and tying those back to metrics, goals, and trade-offs. So the conversation today will be focused on kind of part two of that discussion, which is solutions, challenges, and opportunities that relate to reshoring and nearshoring decisions. We'll touch on cost and risk management, human capital considerations, and service and quality implications. So David and Chip, in a situation where a company in the US or Canada has made a decision to nearshore, can you both talk about what the potential cost and risk implications are, human capital, and service and quality implications?
Sure, Paul. As you think about, you've made the decision to reshore or nearshore. In both of those scenarios, you're going to improve your cost structure from a transportation cost, and you have better control over the manufacturing processes. But the risk side of that is, of course, that labor costs on a per hour basis tend to be higher, so moving forward with improving operations capabilities and optimizing your production processes are really important. Labor availability is much better in a nearshoring situation, and logistics is obviously costs are much less than coming over ocean freight. Tariffs and things like that absolutely improve. While may not be quite as good as being in a reshored situation, tariffs are much better than it would be coming from Asia Pacific. One of the key things, especially in industries that are high tech, defense related, or what I'll call high innovation industries, intellectual property security is, and control of that intellectual property is much, much better in a nearshoring solution. And then the stability of the supply base. I mean, one of the key reasons we talked about on the prior webcast was, our supply chains coming from Asia Pacific were not stable. Due to a number of issues. COVID has been a more recent iteration of that, but we said that, 2 years ago, we said our supply chains would be stable again in 2 years. Well, they're not. And now we're saying it's 2 more years, and likely that instability is going to continue. So coming close to point of use is a high improvement in terms of stability of that supply base.
Yeah, it's a really great point, David. And on the service and quality implications part of this, a lot of people forget on the quality side, it's not just the product itself, it's the service. When you look at service measurements, the ultimately highest challenging type of metric you can put on your company is in perfect order fulfillment, which involves the quality piece and the documentation. So by nearshoring, you have created some more flexibility in your supply chain. Typically, you're reducing lead times, and you could be reducing or simplifying these firm cutoff dates for transport, which allow you some more flexibility on all the paperwork and decisions that you have to make with the supply base. In addition to that, you get a reduction in lead times and hopefully everybody knows that when you reduce lead times, a lot of good things can happen, especially on the inventory side of things, and can positively impact your service, which allows shorter window times to anticipate or predict delivery readiness and your shipments.
And in a nearshoring situation, labor availability, we'll talk about labor availability in reshoring, but in nearshoring, labor availability tends to be good. And there is some access to skilled labor, especially region to region. That can vary, but there is access to skilled labor, and labor availability tends to be higher than it is in a reshoring solution.
Absolutely. Great thoughts on that. If we can switch now to talk about the challenges. Chip, could you start us off in pointing out some of the challenges of nearshoring?
Yeah, so David touched on it a little bit already, especially on the cost and the political and economic stability regulatory difference when he was talking about tariffs. So when you're looking at your nearshoring options, some of the challenge can be those tariffs or governmental policy, taxes, regulatory. So you do need to dig into that and understand. I mean, if you're using total cost of ownership, that model will absolutely help you understand all of those different costs and those trade-offs in that area. The regulatory differences for sure. Just as an example, at a current client, where we've got import and export processes like most people do, right? When you're importing, or maybe even you're shipping something across to somewhere else and then getting it back. So even though the process, let's say, is physically similar because you're bringing something in from another country or you're sending something out and bringing it back, there are differences in preparation, paperwork, auditing, and actual transport because of those regulatory requirements between countries.
Excellent point. Yep.
Yeah, and in the human capital considerations are that it is a different, tends to be a different language. But U.S. companies have been, and Canadian companies have been dealing with that for years, ever since the advent of NAFTA. So it's not a huge barrier, but there are language and cultural process differences that you have to consider, and it's a level of difficulty. It's not impossible at all. And then on the service and quality implications, I already spoke to intellectual property security. It's certainly better than in Asia Pacific, but it's not at home either. And then it is vastly improved in terms of the length of the supply chain and then delivery to the customer. But that it's still there. It's it's not local supply, and that has to be considered both in terms of the variability I'm willing to accept in my supply chain in terms of time and availability, but and therefore the inventory I have to carry to cover for that. And then new and existing site and supplier considerations. Again, better control, not as good control.
Excellent. So clearly, nearshoring presents some great opportunities for companies making a move. Also, those are great challenges to point out. If we can switch now to reshoring, what are the potential solutions in a nearshoring decision? Dave, if we could start with you talking about some of those.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And from a cost and risk standpoint, it's the least risky option. You have the most control over the manufacturing process, be that in a vertically integrated within your company solution, or even supply base that is co-located or close by. So it's the least risky option. It's also potentially a higher direct cost. And so again, strategies to counteract that would be automation, increased productivity, optimizing use of assets, things like that. Things we work in lean manufacturing and process improvement. It also has the least inventory in terms of that model. So you improve your supply chain response time the most, and the least amount of inventory in this option. So those are absolute pros for a reshoring solution. From a human capital standpoint, a lot of industries are struggling with retaining and acquiring labor. So, making sure that you have solutions that provide stability in the workforce, making sure you have stability in the workforce, and then ability to acquire workers as you add capacity and throughput to that. Also in the U.S., you tend to have a higher skilled workforce. And while we don't have an apprenticeship program that we spoke about in the last podcast, certainly have a good community college model. And we have a number of clients that work through community colleges to build skilled workforces. And that's a very good model to follow.
Yeah, and being able to develop talent rather than simply trying to bring in existing talent is a great benefit. Chip, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, to kind of piggyback off of David a little bit, you do have, let's say, it is less risky. You have tighter control over what you're doing when you reshore. Again, in the service and quality areas, supply chain piece with inventory control, and your lead time's the lowest. And again, we have lots of examples, of course, but another one where we have a client that's getting parts from let's say a long chain country where they're sitting at 150 days for lead time. And that one was actually, we did it in a multi-step process to nearshore and then reshore, but we cut from 150 to 60 days and then to reshore to 30 days. So you have a lot more cash freed up if you're paying for that inventory from day one. We talk about flexible processes. What does that really mean? Flexibility by definition, actually, I think people associate it a lot with time, but it's your ability to ramp up and ramp down volumetrically and respond to demand, okay, within X period of time. And you are able to be more agile, which is way more time-based as well, around because of your shorter lead times. When your customer's asking for something, you don't have to go back and try to figure things out over 150 days. You have a shorter window, which allows you to be more agile and allows you to ramp up or ramp down or respond to those emergencies so you can save the day for your customer.
Right. That's great,
Yep.
Chip. And I think, if you can continue the thought and talk about that all sounds great. There are obviously some great opportunities with reshoring, but there are certainly some challenges with it. If you could continue your thought and let us know what you think about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, sticking to the same kind of area there with service and quality, you have a lot of the same, let's say, challenges as you do in nearshoring. But on the supply side, you do have these new or existing site and supplier considerations to think about. So just because you have a footprint today with your long chain, your new chain may require you to find brand new sources or new sites or existing sites that have work to be done to them. So there are some other, let's say, challenges in this area as you get that supply base set up. Again, if referring back to the total cost of ownership model, getting all these inputs and considerations so that you can look at all those trade-offs in total cost and service and how that all balances out. That is challenging. Not a lot of people or companies will take the time. They take the time thoughtfully, but sometimes it's hard to take resources from your day-to-day and week-to-week operations to put the extra 4 hours, 20 hours into the math to really understand what the true total cost is.
Excellent point. David?
Yeah, and that's, the other challenge we've hit on these is obviously it can be an impact on the labor cost. So doing an analysis and what are the things I can do either through productivity improvement, embracing those things, and or automation, or both, And then also a labor market analysis, what is the best location? Location does matter in terms of the labor market, what labor market is available to me, and what's the right area to be in from a labor market standpoint is things that we help clients with. And, to the service and quality implications, picking new or expanding existing sites and suppliers considerations, as Chip said, there's an investment in resources to get that done, and so that's a consideration as well. But then the flip side is, Chip talked before about the reducing the time of supply, the actual lead time. But with that lead time, at 150-day lead time, there's also variability in that. So the longer it is, the more variability it is. And so we've seen companies that are going down this path of near and or reshoring that their supply chain time, their lead time was longer, but what was really killing them was that, because of the variability, it took me 150 days on average to get the parts, but some, 3 parts were 200 plus days. And so I had production on the floor sitting and waiting. And that, that is a huge cost that we don't often account for. So as you look at near or reshoring, sometimes the costs are higher, but there's payback not only in the logistics side, but in the predictability of your supply chain.
Yeah. And, it sounds like in both cases, in the nearshoring and reshoring, some of these go back to the fundamentals that we talk about in both, operations and in supply chain. So if you can kind of transition to talking about what the opportunities are in both scenarios. David, if you could start us off with that, please.
Well, I think the opportunities of both are, shorten the supply chain and being more responsive, not only to our customers, but internally and the costs associated with that. It is an opportunity to establish some new strategic vendor relationships and especially in the nearshoring, we're going to have to set up either new suppliers or new facilities perhaps to do that. But it does remove or minimize the risk of the supply chain, both in total lead time, but most importantly, and the hardest to account for is the predictability of that supply chain.
Absolutely. Chip, over to you. Do you have any?
Yeah, sure. On the reshoring side, again, as David had mentioned back in the previous slides around next level lean process or cost and risk management on the ops side, you have the risk of potentially increasing costs on the operations side. So forward thinking through how you can lean out the processes and be the most effective and efficient both on cost and productivity would really help you kind of minimize that cost risk on the reshoring side. On talent management, you're going to have to really get together and understand your current labor strategy, your talent development, talent acquisition strategies to understand what's working today, what's not working today. And if we do this, what are some other avenues or options that are available to us? For example, labor in rural areas or automation opportunities. A little bit of out of the box thinking to understand how to grow and mature and develop the capabilities in your organization. And then, of course, on the supply chain side, having it reshored already gives you more visibility. But again, you may have cost implications by bringing it back home. Digital supply chain management, the cameras, scanners, some of the, let's say we'll call it low tech now, but it wasn't low tech 20 years ago. But so the costs are changing slowly, they're getting there. But digitizing the supply chain, but digitizing the management of the supply chain, I think is a critical area.
Yeah,
agree.
Great points, guys. Thank you for your input on this. And this decision is one that's highly impactful. Nearshoring or reshoring are both very impactful decisions, but I think considering and weighing the opportunities and the challenges with clear eyes are great. Those are great ways to help minimize the risk with such an important decision. So we thank you for joining us for this session today. There is more to come as it's an ongoing conversation on this topic. So next up in the series is taking a look at making reshoring successful in the US, nearshoring successful in Mexico, and then a topic that's really gained a lot of importance lately is looking at the environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, considerations in nearshoring and reshoring. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to continuing the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.